Kicked from the wedding, I confronted him with the ledger of his life, every sacrifice, itemized, and an ultimatum that could cost him everything.
The morning of what should have been the happiest day of my son's life started with a phone call that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. I was buttoning my best suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to every milestone in David's life, when my phone buzzed on the dresser. Unknown number, but something told me to answer anyway. Mr. Harrison, this is Rebecca from Millbrook Country Club. I'm calling about the wedding reception this afternoon. Her voice carried that careful, professional tone people use when they're about to deliver terrible news. I need to confirm the final guest count, and there seems to be some confusion about your attendance. My hands went still on my collar. What kind of confusion? I'm the father of the groom. A pause, papers rustling in the background. Sir, according to the list I have here, you're not on the guest registry. The bride's family specifically requested that I verify this with you directly. The words hit like ice water in my veins. Not on the guest registry. At my own son's wedding. The wedding I'd been planning to attend for 8 months, ever since David called to tell me he'd finally proposed to Melissa after 3 years of dating. There has to be some mistake, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I felt the terrible certainty settling in my chest. I'm David Harrison's father, the groom's father. I understand this is difficult, Mr. Harrison. Perhaps you should speak with your son directly. The ceremony begins at 4, and I need to finalize the arrangements. I hung up without another word and immediately dialed David's number, straight to voicemail, his cheerful voice telling me he'd get back to me soon. I tried again. Voicemail. A third time, and finally, he picked up. Dad, I can't talk right now. It's my wedding day and everything's crazy here. David, I just got a call from the country club. They're saying I'm not on the guest list. Tell me this is some kind of administrative error. The silence stretched between us like a chasm opening up in real time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller. Guilty. Dad, we need to talk about this later. Today isn't the right time. Today isn't the right time? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. It's your wedding day, son. If not today, then when exactly is the right time to discuss why your father isn't invited to watch you get married? Look, this wasn't entirely my decision, okay? Melissa's family has some concerns, and we thought it would be easier if we kept things small and simple. Small and simple. I'd seen the guest list 3 weeks ago when I'd offered to help with the seating arrangements. 230 people. Melissa's entire extended family, college friends, work colleagues, people I'd never even heard of. But not me. What kind of concerns, David? Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, probably the wedding party getting ready, living the normal pre-wedding chaos that I should have been part of. Dad, you know how you can be sometimes. The comments you make, the way you act around Melissa's family, they're worried about drama on what's supposed to be a perfect day. The way I act, the comments I make, I thought about every interaction I'd had with Melissa's parents over the past 3 years. Richard and Patricia Thornfield, both successful attorneys who lived in a world I'd never quite fit into. Sure, I'd made a few jokes that didn't land. Maybe I'd been too casual at their dinner parties, too willing to talk about my construction business when they wanted to discuss wine pairings and summer homes in the Hamptons. So instead of talking to me about whatever concerns they have, you decided to just uninvite me without even telling me? It's not uninviting if you were never officially invited in the first place. The words were like a slap. Never officially invited to my own son's wedding. The son I'd raised alone after his mother died when he was 12. The boy I'd worked double shifts to put through college who'd lived in my house until 6 months ago. Who'd called me every Sunday for advice about everything from career decisions to whether he should propose. David, I've been planning to attend this wedding for months. I took time off work. I bought a suit. I've been telling everyone at the job site about how proud I am of you. Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is. Maybe we can do something special afterward. Just the 3 of us. A nice dinner or something. A nice dinner. Like I was a distant relative being offered a consolation prize instead of the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd sat through every Little League game, who'd held him when he cried about his mother's death. Who else knows about this? Does your Uncle Mike know he's going to a wedding where the groom's father isn't welcome? Dad, I have to go. The photographer is here and we're already running behind schedule. Answer the question, David. Does your family know you've excluded me from the most important day of your life? We'll talk about this tomorrow, okay? I promise we'll sit down and work everything out. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long moment. then set it down carefully on the dresser next to the boutonniere I'd bought to match David's wedding colors. Navy blue and gold, Melissa's choices. I'd spent an hour at the florist making sure it was perfect. I walked to my closet and hung the suit back up. The navy blue one I'd worn to David's high school graduation, his college graduation, the day he got his first job. The suit that was supposed to be part of the proudest moment of my life as a father. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and tried to process what had just happened. My son had gotten married without me there, not because of some emergency or family crisis, but because his new in-laws found me embarrassing, because I wasn't sophisticated enough for their country club wedding. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue around the thornfields, the way Patricia would wrinkle her nose when I mentioned working construction, like it was something distasteful. The way Richard would change the subject whenever I tried to contribute to conversations about business or politics, dismissing my opinions with the subtle condescension of someone who'd never worked with his hands. But I tolerated it all because I loved David, because I wanted him to be happy, even if that meant swallowing my pride around people who clearly thought I wasn't good enough for their precious daughter. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion itself, it was the cowardice. David couldn't even tell me directly. He'd let me find out from a country club employee, let me show up in my wedding suit, ready to walk him down the aisle, only to discover I wasn't wanted there. I pulled out my laptop and opened my email, scrolling through months of correspondence about wedding preparations. There it was, every conversation we'd had about the big day. David asking for my advice on venues, me offering to help with whatever he needed. His excitement when he described Melissa's dress, the flowers, the band they'd hired. Not once had he mentioned that I wouldn't be there to see any of it. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the afternoon. Photos from the ceremony, sent by my brother Mike, who was apparently one of the 230 people worthy of witnessing my son's marriage. David in his tuxedo, looking handsome and happy. Melissa in her white dress, radiant as every bride should be. The happy couple cutting their cake, dancing their first dance, surrounded by everyone they loved. Everyone except me. By evening, the reality had settled into something harder than hurt, something that felt more like resolve. I'd spent 26 years being David's father, sacrificing everything to give him the best life possible. I'd worked overtime for years to pay for his college education. I'd co-signed his first apartment lease when his credit wasn't established. I'd been there for every triumph and failure, every broken heart and celebration. And when the most important day of his life arrived, he'd chosen his new family over the man who'd raised him. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the folder where I kept all my financial records, 26 years of receipts, bank statements, and documentation of every dollar I'd spent on my son's upbringing and education. Everything from diapers and baby formula to college tuition and textbooks. If David wanted to start his new life by treating me like a stranger, then maybe it was time he understood exactly what this stranger had invested in his future. I pulled out my calculator and began adding up the numbers. This wasn't about revenge or trying to hurt him financially. This was about making a point that apparently needed to be made very clearly. Actions have consequences, and choices reveal character. The total, when I finally reached it 3 hours later, was staggering even to me. $250,000, give or take. 26 years of love, sacrifice, and financial support, documented down to the last receipt for school supplies and soccer cleats. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. Not a letter full of anger and hurt feelings, though I had plenty of both. This would be something more formal, more businesslike. After all, if I wasn't family anymore, then our relationship could be purely transactional. The invoice I was about to create would itemize every expense, every sacrifice, every dollar spent raising the son who decided I wasn't good enough to watch him get married. And tomorrow morning, while David and Melissa were probably opening wedding gifts and basking in their newlywed bliss, they'd receive a very different kind of surprise in their mailbox. Something that would make them understand that excluding someone from your life doesn't erase the debt you owe them for making that life possible in the first place. I cracked my knuckles and started with the hospital bill from the day David was born. 26 years ago, when I'd held him in my arms and promised I'd always be there for him. Some promises apparently only work one way. The hospital bill was just the beginning. $8,473 for the delivery, plus another $2,000 for the complications that kept us there an extra 3 days. I remembered sitting in that uncomfortable chair beside Linda's bed, watching our newborn son sleep in his bassinet, completely unaware that cancer was already growing inside his mother. I typed each number carefully, cross-referencing it with the faded receipt I'd kept in a shoebox for over 2 decades. Some people might call it obsessive, keeping every financial record from David's childhood, but I learned early that single fathers had to document everything: school enrollment, medical emergencies, custody battles that never came but could have. You never knew when you'd need proof of your commitment. The daycare expenses came next. Sunshine Learning Center, where I'd drop David off every morning at 6:30 before heading to the construction site. $47 a day, 5 days a week, for 3 years. The director, Mrs. Patterson, used to comment on how I was always the first parent to arrive and the last to pick up. What she didn't know was that those extra hours weren't by choice. They were survival. Construction work meant starting before dawn and finishing after dark. It meant taking every overtime shift available because daycare bills didn't care if you were tired or if your back ached from carrying steel beams all day. It meant working weekends whenever possible because a single father's income had to stretch twice as far as everyone else's. I found the folder marked medical expenses and felt my chest tighten. David had been a healthy kid, thankfully, but healthy kids still needed regular checkups, vaccinations, dental work. I'd had insurance through the union, but it didn't cover everything. Co-pays for pediatrician visits, orthodontist bills when his teeth came in crooked, the emergency room visit when he broke his arm falling out of the treehouse I'd built in our backyard. That treehouse had been my attempt to give him something normal, something fun that other kids had. I'd spent 3 weekends measuring, cutting, and nailing boards together, while David handed me screws and asked 1,000 questions about why wood needed to be treated and how weight distribution worked. The final cost was $418 for materials, not counting the hours of labor that I could have spent on paying jobs. But seeing his face light up when he climbed that ladder for the first time had been worth every penny and every sore muscle. The school expenses filled 2 entire pages of my invoice. Not just tuition for the private elementary school I'd chosen after researching test scores and teacher-to-student ratios, but all the hidden costs that added up month after month. School supplies, field trip fees, fundraiser purchases I couldn't afford but bought anyway because I didn't want David to be the kid whose parent couldn't contribute to the class pizza party. I remembered the morning he came home excited about joining the school band. The rental fee for a trumpet was $60 a month, plus lessons, plus sheet music, plus the special uniform required for concerts. I'd worked an extra job that summer, doing home repairs on weekends, to cover the additional expenses. David had played that trumpet for exactly 1 semester before deciding he preferred soccer. The soccer expenses were their own category: registration fees, equipment, tournament travel costs, team dinners at Pizza Hut after every game. I'd coached his team for 2 years when they couldn't find enough parent volunteers. Those Saturday mornings standing on the sideline, cheering for kids who mostly ignored the plays we'd practiced, had been some of the happiest moments of my life. David had been good at soccer, naturally athletic in a way that reminded me of Linda. She'd been the athlete in our family, the one who'd played college volleyball and still held the school record for service aces. David had inherited her coordination and competitive spirit, along with her stubborn streak and quick temper. High school brought a new level of financial complexity. The public school was decent, but David had his sights set on the private academy across town where his friends were going. The tuition was $12,000 a year, not counting books, technology fees, and the mandatory laptop program. I'd taken out a second mortgage on our house to cover the first year, telling myself it was an investment in his future. The laptop had been $800. The graphing calculator required for advanced math was another $150. The class ring he'd insisted he needed was $200, and he'd worn it exactly twice before losing interest. But what choice did I have? I wanted him to fit in, to have the same opportunities as his classmates whose parents drove BMWs and vacationed in Europe. I found the college preparation folder and winced at the numbers: SAT prep courses, college application fees, campus visits to schools in 3 different states. The guidance counselor had recommended hiring a private college consultant to help with essays and interviews. $5,000 to help my son get into the same caliber school that other kids accessed through family connections and alumni networks. David had been accepted to 7 universities, but only one offered the kind of financial aid package we desperately needed. State University wasn't his first choice, but it was what we could afford even with student loans supplementing my contribution. I'd promised to cover his room and board if he maintained a B average. That promise had cost me $43,000 over 4 years, paid through a combination of my savings, additional work, and careful budgeting that meant I hadn't bought myself new clothes in 3 years. The graduation gift had been a used car, a reliable Honda Civic with low mileage that I'd found through a coworker, $6,800 that wiped out the emergency fund I'd been building for 2 years. But David needed transportation for his first job, and public transit wasn't reliable enough for a daily commute. I paused in my calculations and walked to the kitchen for another cup of coffee. Outside my window, I could see the neighbor's house lit up with party lights, probably celebrating something normal, something that didn't involve calculating the cost of unconditional love. The apartment deposit for David's first place after college had been $1,800, plus the first month's rent. He'd needed furniture, kitchenware, a security deposit for utilities. I'd spent a weekend driving around to garage sales and thrift stores, helping him find affordable pieces that would make his empty apartment feel like home. The pride in his voice when he'd called to tell me about cooking his first dinner in his own kitchen had made every dollar worthwhile. Or so I'd thought at the time. The engagement ring consultation was the most recent entry in my financial records. David had asked me to meet him at the jewelry store, wanting my opinion on different settings and stone sizes. I'd assumed he was including me in the decision-making process because my opinion mattered to him. Now I realized he'd probably just wanted someone with a credit card to help with the down payment. The ring had cost $4,300, more than I'd spent on Linda's engagement ring 28 years earlier. But David had been so nervous, so excited about proposing, that I'd agreed to co-sign the payment plan without hesitation. He'd promised to take over the monthly payments once he and Melissa were engaged, and to his credit, he had. But the principle remained. I'd helped him buy the ring that symbolized his commitment to the woman whose family had deemed me unworthy of witnessing their union. The final tally was even higher than I'd initially calculated, $267,432, plus interest, if I wanted to be truly businesslike about it. 26 years of compound interest on the investment I'd made in raising a son who'd grown up to be ashamed of his father. I formatted the invoice professionally, the way I'd learned to bill clients for construction work, itemized expenses, payment terms, contact information for questions or disputes. At the top, I typed David's name and the address of the apartment I'd helped him secure. Under services rendered, I wrote childcare, education, housing, medical care, emotional support, and life guidance provided to David Michael Harrison from birth through age 26. The due date, I decided, would be 30 days from receipt. Standard business practice for invoices of this magnitude. I wasn't actually expecting payment, of course. This wasn't about the money itself, but about making David understand what he'd thrown away when he'd chosen his new family over the man who'd sacrificed everything to give him life itself. I printed 3 copies of the invoice, one for my records, one for David, and one that I'd keep in case this situation required legal documentation later. Not that I had any intention of taking my own son to court, but the hurt was so fresh and so deep that I wanted to preserve evidence of this moment, proof that I'd tried to make him understand the magnitude of what he'd done. The envelope was addressed in my careful handwriting, the same penmanship I'd used to sign permission slips and report cards for 2 decades. David Harrison and Melissa Thornfield Harrison, their new hyphenated surname that somehow managed to exclude any reference to the Harrison legacy I'd thought I was building. I sealed the envelope and placed it on my kitchen counter, ready for tomorrow's mail pickup. Then I sat back in my chair and wondered if this was what heartbreak felt like when it crystallized into something harder, something that looked less like grief and more like the kind of justice that could only be served in carefully calculated columns of numbers. My phone buzzed with another text message, probably more wedding photos from my brother. I didn't check it. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and finally took off the shirt and tie I'd put on 12 hours earlier, planning to watch my son promise to love and honor his bride until death do them part. Tomorrow, he'd receive an invoice that would show him exactly what promises looked like when they came with a price tag attached. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I'd slept maybe 3 hours, tossing and turning while my mind replayed every conversation I'd had with David over the past few months. Looking back now, I could see the signs I'd missed, the way he'd grown distant whenever I asked about wedding details, his reluctance to discuss seating arrangements or his bachelor party plans, the careful way Melissa would change the subject whenever I mentioned how excited I was to dance with her at the reception. I'd attributed it all to normal pre-wedding stress. Young couples got overwhelmed planning their big day. I told myself that David was just busy with work, and wedding preparations, that once the ceremony was over, things would go back to normal between us. What a fool I'd been. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the sealed envelope containing David's invoice. In the harsh morning light, part of me wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe I should call him, try to work things out like adults. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of yesterday's betrayal. Then I remembered Rebecca's voice on the phone. The bride's family specifically requested that I verify this with you directly. Not a misunderstanding or administrative error, a deliberate decision to exclude me from the most important day of my son's life. I grabbed my truck keys and drove to the post office before I could change my mind. The postal worker, a middle-aged woman named Janet, who'd been working the counter for as long as I'd lived in town, smiled when she saw me approaching. "Morning, Tom. How was the big wedding yesterday? I bet you're exhausted but happy." The words hit like a physical blow. Of course she knew about David's wedding. I'd probably mentioned it a dozen times over the past few months while buying stamps or mailing invoices for my construction business. Small towns remember details like that, especially when a proud father couldn't stop talking about his son's upcoming marriage. "It was something," I managed, sliding the envelope across the counter. "Certified mail, please. Return receipt requested." Janet processed the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. She didn't ask why I was sending certified mail to my own son, though I caught her glancing at the address label with curiosity. "Should arrive tomorrow," she said, handing me the receipt. "Big day today for the newlyweds, I'm sure. Probably opening gifts and planning their honeymoon." I nodded and left without another word, Janet's well-meaning assumptions following me out to the parking lot like ghosts of the relationship David and I used to have. Back home, I tried to focus on normal Sunday activities. I read the newspaper, watched part of a football game, made a sandwich I barely tasted. But my mind kept drifting to what David and Melissa were doing right now. Were they having breakfast in bed at some fancy hotel? Opening wedding presents from all the people who'd been deemed worthy of sharing their special day? Laughing about how perfectly everything had gone according to plan? My brother Mike called around noon. I'd been expecting this conversation since I'd seen him in the wedding photos David had posted on social media. Mike, who'd been my best man at my own wedding, who'd helped me through Linda's death and the difficult years of single parenthood that followed. Mike, who'd watched me sacrifice everything for David without ever questioning whether it was worth it. "Tom, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." I settled into my recliner, the same one where I'd helped David with homework for 12 years. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Mike?" "You know what? The wedding? The fact that you weren't there? David's been trying to call you since last night, but you're not answering your phone." David's been calling because he feels guilty, not because he's sorry. There's a difference. Mike was quiet for a moment. I could hear voices in the background, probably his wife Linda making Sunday dinner for their family. Normal family activities for people whose sons didn't exclude them from major life events. "Tom, I'm not going to pretend I understand what happened or why you weren't there. David gave me some story about family complications and keeping the guest list small, but I know that's bullshit. That wedding had more people than most small towns." "Did he tell you it was Melissa's family who didn't want me there? That they were worried I'd embarrass them in front of their country club friends?" Another pause. "Jesus, Tom, are you serious?" "Dead serious. Apparently, being a construction worker who makes jokes that don't land at dinner parties makes me unsuitable company for the Thornfields and their sophisticated social circle. And David went along with this? Not only went along with it, but didn't have the courage to tell me himself. I found out from the country club coordinator when she called to verify the guest count. Mike's response was a string of profanity that would have made our father proud. He'd always had a temper, especially when it came to family loyalty. Growing up, Mike had been the one to throw punches when neighborhood kids made fun of our secondhand clothes or our father's drinking problem. He understood what it meant to protect the people you loved, even when they couldn't protect themselves. "What are you going to do about it?" I looked toward my kitchen counter, where the certified mail receipt sat next to my coffee mug. "I've already done it." "Tom, what does that mean?" "It means David wanted to start his marriage by treating me like a stranger, so I'm responding accordingly. If we're not family anymore, then our relationship can be purely business." Mike was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a warning. "Tom, don't do anything stupid. I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But don't make decisions you'll regret when you've had time to cool down. 26 years, Mike. 26 years of putting that boy first in every decision I made. I worked myself into the ground to give him opportunities I never had. I sacrificed everything, including any chance of finding someone to share my life with after Linda died, because I thought being a good father was the most important thing I could do. You were a good father, Tom, one of the best I've ever seen. Then why wasn't I good enough to watch my own son get married? The question hung between us like a challenge neither of us could answer. Mike had seen me coach David's Little League team, attend every school play and parent-teacher conference, work double shifts to pay for college. He'd watched me turn down dates and social invitations because I didn't want David to feel like he was competing for my attention. Maybe you should talk to David directly instead of whatever it is you're planning. I tried talking to David yesterday morning when I found out I wasn't invited to his wedding. He told me it wasn't the right time to discuss it, then hung up on me to take pictures with his photographer. And today? Today he gets to learn what it costs to raise a child when you don't have the luxury of taking that sacrifice for granted. After Mike hung up, promising to call back once he'd had time to process what I'd told him, I found myself walking through my house like a stranger seeing it for the first time. Every room held evidence of the life I'd built around raising David. The living room where he'd played with Legos for hours, building elaborate cities and spaceships while I worked on construction blueprints at the dining table, the kitchen where I'd taught him to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, both of us covered in flour and laughing at our mistakes. His bedroom had been converted to my home office years ago, but I could still see ghostly outlines on the wall where his sports posters had hung. The closet still held a box of his childhood belongings that I'd never had the heart to throw away. Report cards with gold stars, artwork from elementary school, the trophy from his 8th grade science fair project on solar energy. I'd kept everything, thinking someday he might want to show these treasures to his own children. Now I wondered if those hypothetical grandchildren would even know their grandfather existed. My phone rang again around dinner time. David's name on the caller ID, the third time he'd tried to reach me since morning. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message back with the detachment of someone listening to a business call. Dad, please pick up. I know you're angry about yesterday, and I know I handled it badly. Melissa and I want to take you to dinner this week so we can explain everything properly. There's a lot you don't understand about the situation, and I think if we just sit down and talk, we can work this out. Please call me back. A lot I didn't understand, as if the mathematics of exclusion were somehow complicated, as if there were nuances to being deemed unworthy that would make sense once David explained them properly. I deleted the message without calling back. Monday morning brought my normal routine with one significant addition. The return receipt for David's certified letter arrived in my mailbox, confirming that he'd signed for the envelope containing his invoice. I imagined him standing at his apartment door in his bathrobe, probably expecting a wedding card from a distant relative who'd missed the ceremony. Instead, he'd received a 27-page itemized bill for the cost of his upbringing. I hoped Melissa had been there when he opened it. I hoped she'd seen her new husband's face when he realized what his father had calculated as the true cost of their perfect wedding day. My phone started ringing at 8:30. David's number, then Melissa's, then David again. I turned the ringer off and went to work, spending the day installing kitchen cabinets in a house where the owners kept thanking me for the quality of my craftsmanship. Normal people who appreciated skilled work and treated contractors with basic human respect. The kind of respect I'd apparently failed to earn from my own son's new family. When I got home that evening, my voicemail was full. 7 messages from David, increasingly frantic as the day progressed. 2 from Melissa, her voice tight with what sounded like panic. 1 from Mike, asking if I'd lost my mind. And surprisingly, 1 from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, saying a young couple had come by looking for me around lunchtime and seemed very upset when she told them I was at work. I listened to David's final message while heating up leftover pizza for dinner. Dad, what the hell is this invoice supposed to mean? You can't seriously expect me to pay you back for raising me. That's not how families work. That's not how any of this works. I'm coming over tomorrow morning and we're going to settle this like adults. This whole thing has gone too far. I set down my phone and finished my pizza in silence, David's words echoing in my head. That's not how families work. The irony was so thick I could taste it alongside the cold cheese and pepperoni. He was right, of course. That wasn't how families were supposed to work. Families were supposed to include each other in life's biggest moments. Families were supposed to have difficult conversations instead of letting country club coordinators deliver the bad news. Families were supposed to choose love over social status, loyalty over convenience. But David had redefined our family dynamic the moment he'd allowed the Thornfields to exclude me from his wedding. If we weren't operating under traditional family rules anymore, then perhaps it was time to establish some new ones. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of autumn chill that reminded you winter was coming, whether you were ready or not. I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when I heard a car door slam in my driveway with more force than necessary. Through my kitchen window, I could see David's Honda Civic, the one I'd helped him buy 5 years ago, parked at an angry angle behind my truck. He was alone, which surprised me. I'd expected Melissa to come with him, if only to witness the confrontation she'd helped orchestrate. Maybe she was waiting in the car, or maybe she'd decided this particular family drama was beneath her involvement. David's knock was sharp and impatient, the kind of demanding rhythm that announced he wasn't going anywhere until he got answers. I took my time finishing my coffee before walking to the door. When I opened it, I found my son standing on my porch in wrinkled clothes, his hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as well as I had. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Good morning to you too," I replied, closing the door behind him. David was already pacing my living room, the 27-page invoice clutched in his hand like evidence of a crime. "Dad, what is this supposed to accomplish? Are you trying to punish me? Are you trying to make some kind of point?" I settled into my recliner, the same spot where I'd helped him with algebra homework when he was 14, and struggling with equations that seemed impossible to solve. "I'm trying to make several points, actually. The first one is about respect." "Respect?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You think sending me a bill for my childhood is about respect? I think excluding your father from your wedding without even telling him directly is about a lack of respect. The invoice is just documentation." David stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but something closer to genuine bewilderment, as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "Dad, you have to understand the position Melissa and I were in. Her parents had very specific expectations about the wedding. They were paying for most of it, and they wanted everything to be perfect, sophisticated. They were worried about their friends, their business associates, the impression everything would make. And what impression would I have made exactly?" He ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "You know what I mean. The way you joke around, the stories you tell about work, the way you dress. Melissa's father is a federal judge. Her mother sits on 3 different charity boards. They move in circles where image matters. So I'm an embarrassment. That's not what I'm saying." "That's exactly what you're saying, David. You're saying I'm not refined enough, not educated enough, not sophisticated enough to be seen with your new family." He slumped onto my couch, suddenly looking younger than his 26 years. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. We talked about having a small ceremony with just immediate family afterward. Something intimate where we could celebrate properly." "When? When were you planning to have this intimate celebration with the man who raised you?" "We hadn't figured out the details yet." I picked up the invoice from where he'd dropped it on my coffee table. "David, do you know what this number represents?" "It represents you losing your mind. It represents 26 years of choosing you over everything else. Every overtime shift I worked, instead of dating someone who might have made me happy. Every weekend I spent at soccer games instead of fishing trips with my friends. Every dollar I could have spent on myself that went toward giving you opportunities I never had." His face was flushing red, the same way it used to when he was caught in a lie as a child. "Dad, parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children. That's what being a parent means. You don't get to send them a bill for it later." "You're absolutely right. Parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children. And children are supposed to grow up grateful for those sacrifices, not ashamed of the people who made them." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I'm not ashamed of you, Dad." "Then why wasn't I at your wedding?" "Because Melissa's parents threatened to pull their financial support if we didn't keep the guest list to their approved list. Because her father said he wouldn't walk her down the aisle if there were going to be people there who didn't fit their social expectations, because we were scared of losing everything we'd planned." The truth hung between us like a confession finally dragged into daylight. David hadn't excluded me because he was ashamed of me. Exactly. He'd excluded me because he'd been too weak to stand up to people who were ashamed of me. "So you chose their money over your father." "It wasn't that simple." "It was exactly that simple, son. You had a choice between keeping the Thornfields happy and including the man who raised you in the most important day of your life. You chose their approval." David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What would you have done in my position? If someone was threatening to take away everything you'd worked for, I'd have told them to go to hell and found another way to pay for the wedding. I'd have had the ceremony in a public park if necessary. I'd have served hot dogs and potato salad if that's all I could afford. But I'd have made sure the people who mattered most to me were there to witness it. He looked around my living room, taking in the worn furniture and faded carpet, the modest decorations of a man who'd spent his money on someone else's dreams instead of his own comfort. You don't understand what it's like to have opportunities like this. The connections, the social network, the career advantages that come from marrying into a family like the Thornfields. You're right. I don't understand what it's like to sell your integrity for social advancement. Your mother and I didn't teach you that particular skill. The mention of Linda hit him like a physical blow. His face crumpled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the 12-year-old boy who'd cried in my arms the night we'd lost her. Don't bring Mom into this. She would have understood the difficult position we were in. Your mother would have told the Thornfields exactly what she thought of their social expectations. She would have reminded you that family loyalty isn't negotiable, no matter what advantages you might gain by betraying it. David stood up abruptly, anger replacing the momentary vulnerability. So what happens now? Do you actually expect me to pay this invoice? Do you want me to write you a check for $250,000? I want you to understand what that number represents. I want you to look at every line item and remember what I gave up to make your life possible. I want you to think about the man who worked 2 jobs so you could go to that private high school, who took out a second mortgage so you could attend college without crushing debt, who co-signed your first apartment lease and helped you buy your first car. And then I want you to explain to me how that man wasn't good enough to watch his son get married. David picked up the invoice again, scanning the pages with growing recognition. You kept receipts for everything. I kept receipts because I wanted to remember every sacrifice as a choice made out of love. Now they're evidence of how little that love was worth to you when it mattered most. He was crying openly now, tears falling onto the carefully itemized list of his childhood expenses. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I screwed up. I know I should have fought harder for you to be there, but I can't undo what happened. I can't go back and have the wedding over again. No, you can't, but you can decide what kind of man you want to be going forward. You can decide whether you're the kind of person who abandons family when it's convenient or the kind who fights for the people who fought for him. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, giving him space to process what I'd said. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson working in her garden, probably wondering about the raised voices coming from my house. Normal neighborhood drama was usually limited to property line disputes and complaints about barking dogs. When I returned to the living room, David was sitting on the edge of the couch, the invoice spread across the coffee table like a map of our relationship. The engagement ring payment, he said quietly, pointing to one of the line items. You helped me with the down payment because I wanted to get her something special. I wanted you to be able to give the woman you loved a ring that would make her happy. The college expenses, you worked construction jobs on weekends to help with my tuition. I worked those jobs because I wanted you to graduate without the kind of debt that would limit your choices. He was reading through the list methodically now, his finger tracing each entry like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had taken 26 years to complete. The treehouse materials. I remember you building that for me when I was 8. You wanted a treehouse like the one your friend Tommy had. I spent 3 weekends figuring out how to make it safe and sturdy. The soccer equipment, the band instrument rental, the science fair project supplies. His voice was getting smaller with each item. You paid for all of it without ever complaining. I paid for it because seeing you happy was worth more to me than anything I could have bought for myself. David looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Then why does this invoice exist? If you did all of this out of love, why are you trying to make me pay you back? I sat down across from him, close enough to see the boy I'd raised in his adult features. Because love shouldn't be one-sided, son. Because gratitude isn't something you can take for granted. Because when you excluded me from your wedding, you treated 26 years of sacrifice like it meant nothing. I never said it meant nothing. You didn't have to say it. You showed it by choosing the Thornfields' approval over my presence at the most important day of your life. David folded the invoice carefully, creasing each page with the precision he'd inherited from his mother. What do you want from me, Dad? An apology? A promise that it won't happen again? What would it take for you to forgive me? The question I'd been waiting for, the one that would determine whether this confrontation was about punishment or reconciliation. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to prove that you've learned the difference between family and social networking. And I want you to make a choice about what kind of husband and son you're going to be. What kind of choice? I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Melissa's parents are hosting a reception for their business associates next month, a celebration of their daughter's successful marriage to showcase their new son-in-law to their professional network. David's face went pale. How do you know about that? Small town, son. Word gets around when federal judges plan fancy parties. The question is whether I'll be invited to this one, or whether you'll find another excuse to exclude the embarrassing construction worker from your sophisticated social events. He stared at the paper in my hand, probably recognizing it as another test he wasn't sure he could pass. Dad, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. Melissa's father has connections that could change my entire career. Her mother knows people who could open doors I never dreamed of walking through. And what does your father know, David? The question hung in the air between us, like a challenge that would define everything that came next. David's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to solve an equation with variables he'd never learned to calculate. The silence stretched between us, filled with 26 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed better, and proud moments at school plays where I'd been the loudest parent cheering in the audience. Your father knows what it means to keep promises, I said finally. Your father knows the difference between earning respect and buying it. Your father knows that character isn't something you can trade away for career advancement. He folded the paper without reading it, his hands shaking slightly. This reception isn't the same as the wedding. It's a business function. The guest list is predetermined by professional relationships, and I'm not professional enough for your new family's business associates. That's not what I meant. David, stop telling me what you didn't mean and start telling me what you do mean. Are you going to spend the rest of our relationship making excuses for why I don't fit into your upgraded life? He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window, where he'd once pressed his nose against the glass, waiting for me to come home from work. You're asking me to choose between my marriage and my relationship with you. I'm asking you to choose between being the man I raised you to be and being the man the Thornfields want you to become. Those are two very different people, son. Through the window, I could see a young father teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle in the street, running alongside her as she wobbled toward independence. That had been us once, in this same neighborhood, on this same street. I'd held the back of David's bike seat, promising I wouldn't let go, then gradually releasing my grip until he was pedaling on his own, proud and free. When had I stopped being the father he was proud to have supporting him? The invoice stays on the table until you make your decision, I said quietly. Not about the money. I don't want your money, but about what kind of man you're going to be. Whether you're going to honor the sacrifices that made your success possible, or whether you're going to keep pretending they never happened. David turned back to face me, tears streaming down his cheeks. I can't lose Melissa, Dad. I love her. I'm not asking you to lose her. I'm asking you to be worthy of her love by showing her the man who raised you, the man who taught you right from wrong, who showed you what loyalty looks like, who demonstrated that real strength comes from protecting the people who can't protect themselves. What if she can't accept that man? The question that had been hiding underneath all the excuses and social anxieties finally surfaced. David wasn't just afraid of disappointing the Thornfields. He was afraid that the woman he'd married might not love him if she truly knew where he came from. Then she's not the woman you think she is, and this marriage is built on a foundation that won't survive the first real storm you face together. I walked to my kitchen and pulled out a business card from the drawer where I kept important documents. This is the number for the counselor who helped me after your mother died, Dr. Sarah Martinez. She understands what it means to lose the people who matter most to you. David took the card with trembling fingers. Dad, are you saying you've lost me? I'm saying you get to decide whether I have or not. The choice is yours, son. It always has been. He looked around the living room one more time, his eyes lingering on the photos of his childhood, the trophies from his high school achievements, the graduation picture where we stood together, both of us grinning with pride at what we'd accomplished together. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. But remember that every day you wait is another day you're choosing to let other people define what our relationship is worth. After David left, I sat in my recliner and stared at the invoice he'd left behind on the coffee table. 27 pages of love documented in dollars and cents, sacrifices measured in receipts and bank statements. The mathematics of fatherhood, calculated down to the last penny spent on someone else's dreams. My phone rang 3 hours later. Mike's number. Tom, David just left my house. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Good. Maybe that means he's finally starting to understand what he threw away. He told me about the invoice. Jesus, Tom, $250,000? Every penny documented and accounted for. 26 years of choosing him over everything else. Mike was quiet for a moment. What happens if he can't make the choice you want him to make? What happens if the Thornfield's influence is stronger than the values you taught him? I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one where David used to sit when we'd have our serious father-son conversations about bullies at school, girlfriends who broke his heart, and the kind of man he wanted to become. Then I'll know I did everything I could to raise him right, and his choices from here forward are his own responsibility. And the invoice? The invoice was never about the money, Mike. It was about making him see the true cost of taking love for granted. 6 weeks passed before David called again. 6 weeks of silence that felt like a lifetime, filled with ordinary days that reminded me how quiet my house had become since he'd moved out 2 years ago. I went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, watched the evening news, and went to bed wondering if my son was learning to be the kind of husband who protected his family or the kind who abandoned them when convenience demanded it. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was reading the newspaper and trying not to think about how David and Melissa were settling into their new life together. "Dad, it's me." His voice sounded different, older somehow, like he'd aged years in the weeks since our confrontation. "Hello, son. I wanted to let you know that Melissa and I had a long talk with her parents about the reception next month." I set down my newspaper and waited. I told them that my father would be attending as my guest and that anyone who had a problem with that could discuss it with me directly. The relief that flooded through my chest was so intense I had to sit down. And how did they respond to that? Her father said he was disappointed in my lack of consideration for their social expectations. Her mother suggested we might want to reconsider our priorities. And Melissa? A pause. Melissa said she married me, not my father, but she married all of me, including the part of me that was raised by a man who taught me what loyalty means. I closed my eyes and felt something that had been broken inside me start to heal. "There's something else, Dad. I want to pay off the engagement ring myself. No more payment plan. And I want to take you to dinner this weekend to talk about what kind of father I want to be when Melissa and I have children." "David, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I want our children to know their grandfather. I want them to learn from the man who showed me what it means to sacrifice for the people you love. And I want to make sure they never have to wonder whether their father is proud of where he came from." That Saturday evening, we met at Romano's, the same Italian restaurant where I'd taken him to celebrate every milestone in his life. High school graduation, college acceptance, his first job offer. Now we were celebrating something more important. The moment my son chose to be the man I'd raised him to be, instead of the man other people wanted him to become. Over dinner, David told me about the difficult conversations he'd had with Melissa, the boundaries he'd established with her parents, and the decision they'd made to pay for their own social events rather than accept financial support that came with conditions about guest lists. "It's going to be harder," he admitted, cutting his chicken parmesan with the careful precision he'd inherited from his mother. "We won't be able to afford the kind of lifestyle her parents envisioned for us. But Melissa said she'd rather build something real with me than live a lie with someone she didn't recognize." I reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder, the same way I used to when he was small and needed reassurance that everything would be okay. "Son, the best things in life are always harder. Easy things don't teach you who you really are." When the check came, David reached for his wallet, but I waved him away. "This one's on me. Consider it a celebration dinner for the man you've decided to become." As we walked to our cars, David turned to me with the serious expression he'd worn as a child when he was trying to solve a problem that seemed too big for his understanding. "Dad, about the invoice. I know you said you didn't want the money, but I want to find a way to pay you back. Not all at once, but over time, because I finally understand what those numbers represent." And what do they represent? Love, sacrifice, the choice to put someone else's needs before your own, every single day, for 26 years. That's not something you can put a price on, but it's also not something you should take for granted. I pulled the folded invoice from my jacket pocket, the same 27 pages I'd carried with me since the day I'd mailed it to his apartment. David's eyes widened when he saw it. "I've been carrying this around for 6 weeks, waiting to see what kind of man you'd choose to be." I handed him the invoice, and he took it with both hands like he was accepting something sacred. "Now I know." David unfolded the pages carefully, scanning the itemized list of his childhood one more time. Then, to my complete surprise, he walked to the nearest trash can and dropped the entire invoice inside. That man, he said, pointing to the garbage can, would have kept demanding payment for love that was freely given. The man I want to be knows that some debts can only be repaid by becoming worthy of the sacrifice. As I drove home that night, I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment, the pain of exclusion that had nearly destroyed our relationship, the invoice that had forced us both to confront the true cost of taking family for granted, the difficult choice David had made to honor the man who raised him instead of the people who wanted to change him. Sometimes love requires you to set a price on it, not because you want payment, but because you need the other person to understand its value. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is making them fight for what they've always taken for granted. David had fought and won, and in doing so had become the kind of man who would never send his own son an invoice for the privilege of being loved. The mathematics of fatherhood, I realized, weren't really about addition and subtraction at all. They were about multiplication, the way love grows when it's properly valued, respected, and protected by people who understand its worth. And that kind of math, I thought as I pulled into my driveway, was the only accounting that really mattered in the end. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.